So hello there, welcome along to this Seahawks draft blog Google Hangout. Wanted to just really go into a few questions, do a bit of a Q&A because this is a really significant off-season for the Seahawks, and it feels like this week is going to be the start of everything that happens. So we've got free agency down the road. The draft's obviously still a couple of months away, but the combine is where things are really going to start. We're going to find out so much about the players and the prospects in Indianapolis this week that could essentially shape the next era of Seahawks football. And in particular, Friday is a really big day. It feels like the Seahawks, if they want to get their running game going again, they've got to be aggressive there, more so than at any other position. Whatever changes they make to the defense, and there may be some big trades and some veterans may leave the team. They may try to get younger on defense and cheaper on defense, as we've talked about. They also have to be very active in repairing the running game. Simply adding a third-day running back to a stable of Chris Carson and CJ Prosise and Mike Davis and JD McKissic, plus plugging the left guard problem or rolling with Riso Diambo, for example, just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough to really repair this running game, which is such an important thing now. It's central to really everything that Pete Carroll wants to do. And you can't really put a Band-Aid on this. They're going to have to be aggressive. Picks, possible surprise changes, actively addressing this issue, maybe looking at free agency. They need to bring in a running back who could potentially be the guy. Ideally, they bring in two, one in the draft, one in free agency, and let the two of them battle with Chris Carson to try and be the guy, and may well use a committee moving forward, but they need somebody that they can really rely on. If they need to get a 3rd and 2, for example, they need to have someone in the backfield that they believe can do it. And part of that is going to have to be improvements up front, but part of it is going to have to be the running back as well. Maybe they look for a partnership in the way that you saw New Orleans go with Ingram and Kamara. And you have to find your answer to maybe what they did, which is a tough physical interior runner and a dynamic complement who can also be a feature back in some games when we're required. On the O-line, possibly only one position should be secure, and that's Dwayne Brown at left tackle, a very experienced left tackle. There aren't many good ones in the league. The Seahawks made a big push to acquire him and to get that veteran presence as well. You would imagine that he's pretty secure there. But anything else and any of the other positions, really, it should be on the table. Competition across that line, options and possibilities. It took a while to get this going from 2010 onwards initially when they first wanted to try and repair the running game. They had to go through people like Lendale White and Jones to eventually get to Marshawn Lynch. They had to go through options on the O-line, trying out different players, bringing different people in free agency, going through people like Robert Gallery, spending a lot of picks early in the draft. They had to draft 3 offensive linemen very early in 2010 and 2011 with John Moffitt and with James Carpenter and Russell Okung. They can't Band-Aid their way back to a running game. And I'm not saying anything here that the team won't be fully aware of, because this is a big job. And that's why the running back and the O-line drills on Friday in particular are going to be very important and very intriguing to how the Seahawks put this together, because this is where it starts. Who's going to play left guard? Are they going to make any changes to center, right guard, right tackle? Are they going to bring in any further competition? Are they really going to change the makeup of this offensive line? Are they going to maybe write off some of the investments they've made in the past and make some big surprising changes? Or do they feel like with Brown, with Britt, with Posick, with Afedi, with Fant, with Odiambo, that they have a decent crop there still that just needs to hear a different voice and a new O-line coach and maybe just bring in 1 or 2 players? Or is it more change than that? We're going to start to discover what they're thinking when free agency begins, and we get to see in this draft class what the options are and the alternatives are. And when you look at it on the whole and you see the options there, Quentin Nelson's likely going to be a top 5 pick, but after that, I still think the names to monitor early are people like Isaiah Wynn, Billy Price, Frank Ragnow at Arkansas, Austin Corbett, and possibly Braden Smith. These are all players that are capable of working inside. I'm not sure how they're going to feel about the tackle position in terms of adding others there. You've got Brown, you've got Afedi, you've got Fant on the roster. That might be adequate competition there. They clearly like George Fant an awful lot. We're going to come on to him in the Q&A in a second. But despite the fact that there are a lot of big-bodied offensive tackles, a lot of length, a lot of potential there, is that a position you're going to attack early if you feel somewhat comfortable with Brown, Afedi, Fant, maybe 1 or 2 others that you can bring in along the way without having to spend the early picks? So it might be that interior offensive line that they're looking at the most. And then at running back, Still think the top four are Saquon Barkley, who's going to be a top 3 pick. Ronald Jones II is going to be a first-round pick. And then you've got people like Kerryon Johnson, maybe a first or second, and Nick Chubb, depending on his workout, could easily be a second-round pick as well. And it'll be fascinating to see how these 4 perform at the combine, as well as many other runners, including the usual names, your Royce Freemans, your Darius Guice, your Sony Michel, your Rashad Penny, your John Kelly, and many others. And as we've talked about a lot, explosive testing and size is the key. Remember, for everyone except Ronald Jones II, who probably needs to run faster than anything. Jamal Charles ran between, I think, a 4.38 and a 4.41. So let's see if Jones II can get close to that to further validate that comparison with Jamal Charles. I asked you to send some questions in. We're going to just roll through these now. The first one was from Ashish, and he says, I see the Hawks trading down from number 18 multiple times to get maybe 2 second-rounders or 1 second and a high third, and then selecting guard and running back in any order. What are your thoughts? Well, I think it's inevitable, Ashish, that they do trade down unless they acquire extra stock via trading veterans, which is your Earl Thomas's and your Richard Sherman's has been speculated recently. Even then, trading down appears likely, even if they do that. The value at 18 is not going to be as good as the value in the second or the third round. Personally, I'd really like to see them target someone like Georgia's Isaiah Wynn after moving down, but you could just as easily make a case for trading down multiple times, as you've talked about, and filling out your board with picks in the second and the third. People might not want to do that because it's what the Seahawks have kind of done for a few years and not had as much success as they had, for example, between 2010 and 2012, doing that, trading down and just getting loads and loads of picks. But they have maybe more positions of need than they have done in a long time this year. And this is a draft class that is relatively strong and deep on the front 7 on defense and at running back and guard, which are all need positions. And they maybe are going to have to look at safeties. They perhaps are going to have to look at blocking tight ends. So trading down feels at this point inevitable. And I think the 2 positions that you talked about there, guard and running back, certainly have to be on the radar on the early rounds, because they're probably the 2 positions, as well as linebacker, that are really strong in the first 2 rounds, interior O-line and running back as well. Millhouse Serbia says, Rob, one question for tonight. If you could choose, who would you take? Carlos Hyde, Jonathan Stewart, or DeMarco Murray as a free agent running back addition? I think of the 3, Millhouse, the 3 I would go for, Carlos Hyde. Would be intrigued by the other 2, Stewart and Murray, depending on the price, but Hyde, runs hard, plays physical, could be a nice complement to either Chris Carson or a dynamic running back such as Ronald Jones II. If you put, for example, Hyde next to Ronald Jones II, you might be getting to a position similar to New Orleans with Ingram and with Kamara. So that could be a possibility. There's less tread on the tires with Hyde compared to Stewart and Murray. So that's probably why I would lean towards him. But, any of the 3 I think could be an option for the Seahawks. Murray's obviously not available at the moment. Jonathan Stewart was released today. Pete Carroll is a fan of Jonathan Stewart and maybe someone they will look at as well. But I think Carlos Hyde out of the 3 would be the one that I would talk about. Trevor's got a 3-part question here. Does Ronald Jones weigh at 205? Does the fact that he weighs 205 pounds cause a concern, as he seems too light compared to any other running back Pete Carroll and John Schneider have drafted? He goes on to say, what player are you most interested in seeing test at the combine? Why, and what test measurements are most important for that prospect? And have you watched any tape on Jamarco Jones? And what are your thoughts on him? He looks to have the prototype size. So on Ronald Jones II, the weight doesn't worry me because personally I think he's the second coming of Jamal Charles. And Charles weighed 200 pounds at his combine in 2008. So the question isn't so much whether it's a concern, it's whether he's a player that Seattle's actually going to consider, because he isn't 5'11", he isn't 225 pounds. That's the type of player that they've gone for in the past. And he might just end up going a bit too early for them as well. For me, he's a legit first-round pick, and he's someone is likely to take him in the first round. I think especially since Alvin Kamara did such a good job, he's probably going to go in that first round. So I think someone is going to look at him in the top 32, possibly even in the top 20, 25. I think the Seahawks, like most teams, will really like him, but there's a difference between really liking someone and actually taking them in the first round. They might really like 5 or 6 other guys too, and it might just be that they end up taking that interior offensive lineman or that defensive prospect instead. But it's not a worry. Jones, the second size, is not a worry for me. It's just whether or not it means that he's going to end up in Seattle. They might look for a bigger running back. And if he's faster rather than more explosive, that's another thing that'll work against him when he works out on Friday in terms of the Seahawks as well. But I think he's a fantastic player. The player that I'm most intrigued by, the second part of your question, is Nick Chubb at Georgia, someone we've talked about a lot, of course, because he has the potential to be the star of the combine. But it's also just interesting to see where he is post-injury as well. We know what he's capable of. He had a 4.47 40, he got a 40-inch vertical and a 4.12 short shuttle at the Spark Combine in 2013, which is incredible. If he does anything like that at the combine, people are going to be talking about him possibly even in the first round again. That's how people overreact to these combine events. He was a Kristen Michael style athlete 5 years ago. So let's see where he is now. The most important test for Chubb are going to be the explosive test. It's the vertical and the broad, plus it is the 40. He weighed in, I think, 227 pounds, which is a good size for him. I've read an article this week saying that he seems to be quite happy with where he is. He's benching, and I think he's doing all of the things that he used to do in terms of squatting, the same kind of weights that he did when he was at his peak. He certainly played a lot better in 2017 than he did in 2016 when he rushed back from the injury to try and help Georgia. So I think he's probably in a good place, but it's just the case now. We've talked so often about how much has the knee injury affected Nick Chubb. It's just going to be fantastic to see exactly where he is when he works out the combine. And from what I've seen reported, he's going to do everything at the combine, which is also a great relief as well. He's not just waiting to the Georgia Pro Day. It seems like he's going to do all of the workouts. And in terms of Jamarco Jones, when I watched him play, he looked pretty average to me. I mean, there is some potential there. He's got a great frame. He's got fantastic length. He's somebody who might only ever be pretty good, though. The ceiling might be relatively limited for him. So good size, someone you maybe want to coach and work with, and someone will give him that opportunity. But the tape wasn't that amazing. And watching him at the same time as watching a lot of Billy Price, it was clear to me who was the star in that team. Jason says, what are your thoughts on Colton Miller, who is the UCLA offensive tackle? I've seen some mocks where he gets into the first and second round conversation. So some people seem to really like him, Jason. I'm not sure he's going to test particularly well at the combine. And I'd be a little bit worried about his height and whether he's going to struggle with leverage when you're just that big. I mean, he's nearly 6'9". His technique is going to have to be really spot on. He's going to have to latch on. He's going to give defensive ends a really big target. And if he doesn't have that amazing workout, so if he's not got the loose hips, if he's not got the great kick slide, if he's not going to get into position to use his arms properly and get into the frame and make sure that he's winning more of those battles, if he's kind of a sitting target for a defensive lineman, they're just going to latch onto his frame. They're going to jolt him with a punch. They're going to use their arms to gain that leverage, and then they're going to use their speed and their explosiveness, as most of the defensive linemen in the NFL do now, to give him a hard time. So I think that the height could be a bit of an issue. He will help himself a lot if he has a great workout. I'm not really anticipating it. Some seem to think round one, and you see a lot of reports from well-sourced people suggesting that he could even go in the first round. So I wouldn't rule that out completely. I've seen other people suggesting middle rounds. That's kind of where I was viewing him. So somewhere in the middle might be right. It's often said that big guys like this who can play tackle generally don't hang about. So his floor might be the late second round, kind of that range where Tyson Braylo went a few years ago. I'd be a little bit surprised, though, if he ends up in Seattle and if that's the direction they go, especially in the first two rounds. Christian says, considering other than Joey Hunt, no offensive lineman drafted by John Schneider has had shorter than 33-inch arms. Does measurements knock Price? That's Billy Price at Ohio State, Will Hernandez at UTEP, and Braden Smith off their board. On that bit first, Christian, because I think there's 4 parts to your question. The arm length thing, the only thing I can say is that it could do. It really depends on a few things. Firstly, what does Mike Solari think about this? What's his philosophy on arm length? Does he share similar ideals on physical profile to Tom Cable? Or is he willing to work with a shorter arm guard? We just don't know. It's going to be an interesting draft because we're going to, for the first time, see how they differ and see if they draft a different type of offensive lineman. They did draft Joey Hunt when Tom Cable was here to play center, so presumably they would draft Billy Price for the same position. It's just how do they view Justin Britt's long-term future? If they see him as the long-term center, then they're probably not going to draft a center in the first round, which is probably how they're going to take Billy Price in that first 30 picks, for example, if they wanted to get him. And if Braden Smith has the workout that I expect, does that make up for a lack of arm strength? Perhaps. He could be a sensation at the combine. Like Nick Chubb, he could be one of the big stars this week with people like Malik Jefferson, for example, the linebacker at Texas, like Josh Sweat, Braden Smith, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb. These are the people who could have a really fantastic combine. So if he does that, then does that make up for a bit of arm length? Maybe. I think Price and Hernandez are going to retain their projections overall. I don't think people are going to knock them too much for arm length. I don't think anybody was expecting them to be, 34-inch arms or anything. And they're both interior offensive linemen. And with Smith, it might improve his stock might actually improve if he has the great workout. Christian goes on to ask, if it doesn't knock them completely off the board, does it knock them down around? So I've kind of answered that. He goes on to say, does Isaiah Wynn only have, does the fact he only has 8.5-inch hands bother you? They're the smallest of the combine for his position group. Would he be able to punch? I'm not overly concerned with Wynn's hand size because you barely ever saw him get beat in college, at least in 2017. He's just a masterful blocker, whether he's blocking in the run game, in pass protection. He took on the best teams. It was Alabama and Auburn and the best teams in the SEC, and didn't see any issues there. So I'm not, just based on what you see on the tape, I'm not going to think that the hand size is going to be a huge issue. He actually showed to be quite long and taller than expected. He's just a shade under 6'3". He's got plus 33-inch arms, so I think that will make up for a little bit. To me, I think the best comparison for him is Zach Martin. I have no problem making that comparison. The way that they both played left tackle in college, are going to have to move to left guard, probably in the pros. Martin was always going to move inside, just technically brilliant, very ready, got beat, just looked the part. He was a first-rounder type when he actually went to Notre Dame, and he was always anticipated to be a first-rounder. That's probably a little bit different with Wynn, who's worked himself up, but the way that they played in their final years at their respective schools, Notre Dame and Georgia, very, very similar. Zach Martin actually had 9.25-inch hands, so the difference is only 3/4 of an inch between Zach Martin and Isaiah Wynn, and I'm not sure less than an inch in hand size is that much difference to sort of knock one guy and praise the other. And Martin actually only had 32 and 7/8-inch arms, which are actually shorter than Wynn. So I'm not concerned Wynn is longer than Martin. He's just got very, very slightly smaller hands. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. And the final part of Christian's question is, what is arm length and hand size indicators with offensive linemen? I think you want a minimum of 33-inch arms, ideally. Not sure on the hand size, not something I've studied too much, but with change in Seattle and with a new coach and with a variety of arm and hand lengths drafted previously, it's going to be hard to say, exactly for sure what we need to look for with this group. Patrick wanted to ask about Tennessee running back John Kelly. The big thing about John Kelly is he was expected to be about 205 pounds when he measured today, and was actually 216. So he's gained weight. I think in 2016, he looked more of a 210 pounds type running back. And then last year, he looked a bit smaller, like he'd actually lost weight. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how he tests with the extra weight at 216 and whether that makes him more explosive or whether that actually slows him down. In terms of what I watched today, and I did watch a few Tennessee games, I'm not really focused on John Kelly until tonight. Very fun to watch, plays physical. He's the only player I've seen so far to actually embarrass Chauncey Gardner Jr., who's the Florida safety. Chauncey Gardner Jr. could be a top 10 pick next year. He is fantastic, flies around the field, really intense, big hitter. John Kelly's the only player I've seen embarrass him so far. Dumped him on his backside on one play, just absolutely hammered him at the start of the Florida game in 2017. In a couple of other plays, just left him for dead in the open field, just juked him out of his cleats, really. And I think one of the plays led to a touchdown. Like, Garner was the last man. Kelly got past him, and it was just really, really impressive. Now, I think watching him quite a lot, you don't get the feeling that he's a feature back, that he's going to be somebody that you're going to lean on in the way that, for example, the Seahawks leaned on Marshawn Lynch previously. He's not going to be someone like Nick Chubb, who you're just going to have him run up the middle, wear down an opponent, and have him run 30 times a game. But he could be a really nice complement to someone who is going to do that role. And if the Seahawks take a running back early in the first 2 rounds, for example, and then they want to go back to this class, which would be a good idea because it's a really good, deep draft for running backs. And given the need to improve the running game, I don't think anybody would fault the Seahawks if they actually take 2 of them in this draft class. But if they took an early round running back and then they wanted to go back to the position in round 4, round 5, for example, I think that's probably where Kelly's going to go. He would be a fine option, a really nice complement, someone you give maybe 10 carries a game, someone who can do some work in the passing game. He's very good at screens. His pass protection seems to be quite good. His ball control is very good. So if you look at the breakdown of ball security, he was listed as above average in terms of his ball security. So doesn't fumble too often, and I think he could be an option for the Seahawks possibly on day 3. Patrick also asked about later round offensive linemen and defensive line candidates. I think I'll reserve answering this question on the O-line until we've seen the guys test on Friday and the TEF results and who are maybe some of the underrated athletes that you could find on day 3 who could have the possibility of rising a little bit or maybe even being a steal. I'll answer that question on Friday. But in terms of the defensive linemen, the names that I kind of focusing on at the moment are people like Andrew Brown at Virginia, who could be an option for them, Tyquan Lewis at Ohio State, inside-out type of rusher, Chad Thomas at Miami. There are question marks about how much he's dedicated to football. I think he's quite a talented musician, but we'll see how he tests. Kentavious Street is a really good athlete, could be a 3 technique type of player, 6'2", kind of 290 pounds, expects to have a fantastic combine. Thought Justin Jones had a really good Senior Bowl, could be someone that they look at from NC State. And then you've got the guys we talked about, people like Jeff Holland, for example. Kamoko Toure is probably going to go in round 3 or 4, could be a Leo option for them. So there's some of the names that I'm focusing on at the moment. Ben asks, if Sheldon Richardson leaves in free agency, will be very lean at defensive tackle. Are there any mid-round guys you're excited to see combine numbers for? Do you think adding another run stopper or interior rusher will be more important? I think with run stoppers, you just hope that you're going to find a Tony McDaniel, someone who's really cheap. They've got a few guys who can do that at the moment. I think the most important thing if they lose Sheldon Richardson is to get another pass rusher in there. And the guys they've got, Naz Jones had a really good first year, and John Reed's really shown progress as well. Quentin Jefferson had a decent end to the season too. But just get somebody who can maybe get you 5 or 6 sacks rushing from the interior. Maurice Hurst probably the best one in this draft class in terms of that. He's very intriguing as an interior rusher, but he's going to be a top 40 pick, could be even the top 20. So he's probably not going to be someone they consider unless they want to go with that position in the first round. Deshaun Hand could be an option from Alabama. Derek Nardi, if he lasts, I think he's very, very good, but he could last to round 3, 4. Kentavious Street that we've talked about could be an option. Nathan Shepard showed well at the Senior Bowl, smaller school guy. Justin Jones that we've talked about. So maybe that's an area they could look at on day 3, maybe middle rounds. They've looked for sort of round 3 as a defensive tackle position range in the past. But it also might be an area they look in free agency as well. And Ben also asks, is there a quarterback you could see the Hawks targeting as a late round backup? I think as a possible undrafted free agent, maybe someone like JT Barrett might interest them because of his mobility. And he might be someone like Trevon Boykin in the past that they think they can train up a little bit there and could come in and they don't have to change the offense too much if Russell Wilson picked up an injury. White and Lauletta obviously played well at the Senior Bowl as well. Riley Ferguson had his moments with Memphis last year, but the options aren't amazing unless you want to spend a slightly earlier pick on someone like Luke Falk, who you could trade up. Might not be the best scheme fit for the Seahawks with Russell Wilson and then moving to someone who's very different in Luke Falk, but he has the potential, I think, over time to develop into somebody who could be of interest for other teams if you're looking at trades and stuff like that. But Seattle might just have too many needs elsewhere to do anything other than draft a late round guy or an undrafted guy this year. And considering they've only drafted 1 quarterback so far in Russell Wilson, and given that they've got more needs this year than they have for many, many years, possibly since 2012, it would be a strange thing to do to go and draft a quarterback early this year. And apologies, Ben. I'm sorry, I didn't understand part 3 of your question. So I'll move on to the next one. Mexican Hawk asked 2018, 2019, George Fant, and how you think that plays into the offseason thinking. I think for 2018, George Fant would probably compete at right tackle first and foremost with Jermaine Ifedi and anybody else they bring in. Possibly at guard, but I think more likely right tackle. Possibly seen as a long-term left tackle still. Maybe the heir apparent to Dwayne Brown, especially if he can show well at right tackle. But the key thing for him is just going to get healthy, regain strength and explosive physicality. He's going to have lost weight because he's not been able to do all the things he could do with the knee, and his legs are going to be quite lean, and maybe he needs to work on that. And I think that's the most important thing for him right now. I wouldn't hold out too much hope that he's just going to walk in as a starter. He's got a long journey back. It was a very difficult injury for him, but hopefully 2018 he can compete for a starting role. Hopefully he can get there down the line. And then in terms of 2019, it's whether or not he sticks at right tackle and whether they see him as the future at left tackle, maybe for Dwayne Brown, who's obviously into his 30s. And the Mexican Hawk also asks for thoughts on the wide receiver situation post 2019 and planning a year ahead. He says, what they lose with Jimmy, how do they replace that? Even if he never was a blocking back, his red zone numbers are hard to find elsewhere. I'm against drafting a receiver in round 1 usually, and this year there appears to not be one worth staying put for. But if there was a viable player, I would not mind them pulling the trigger. I don't think the Seahawks are going to take a receiver in round 1. It's not the year to do that. Obviously, Courtland Sutton is the big target, and I do like Courtland Sutton, but I'd be very surprised if that's the direction the Seahawks went in round 1. I think the running game has to take some of the load in terms of red zone production. Jimmy Graham did a great job last year, but the running game did not. They just couldn't score from close in. The running backs only scored 1 touchdown all year, and that was J.D. McKissic. So they need somebody who's going to be able to score rushing touchdowns for them. And if they can get 10 rushing touchdowns out of a running back, that will take some of the production away and take some of the pressure off having to replace what Jimmy Graham did. So that's distinctly possible. But they probably still need a big target, whether that's an Auden Tate type of receiver, maybe on the outside. There are some options in the draft other than Auden Tate. Javon Wims is a player I really like from Georgia, for example. Seahawks receivers have tended to need time, aside from obviously Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett, really. They've never truly had that big-bodied receiver as well, not since Big Mike Williams was here in 2010. So it would be nice to have that as an option. Free agency could provide some relief as well. It's a good group of free agent wideouts. Day 3 might be a receiver option 2. Maybe they take a free agent. Maybe they go for a day 3 bigger body type as well. But tight end is also another position they're going to have to look for. And whether they see somebody in free agency, there's already talk that blocking tight ends could be in demand because there aren't too many in the draft. I'm a big fan of Dalton Schultz. Would love to see the Seahawks have a good look at him. We'll be fascinated to see how he works out as well. Durham Smythe at Notre Dame is another guy that I like. So there are some options in the draft, and there's Will Disley as well from Washington and 1 or 2 others. But it does seem like a position where if Luke Wilson doesn't come back, then you maybe go for a veteran and you go for a draft pick as well, and you try and stack up that position because they do need some options there. So those are the questions that I got sent today. Depending on how people found this video and whether it's something they want me to continue doing during the combine and maybe afterwards as well, then just let me know in the comment section. Let me know what you think about it. If you've got any further questions as well, I will try to answer them. It's going to be a really exciting weekend. So just a heads up for what we're going to be doing as well. Friday, the live blog will be started, and as we've done for the last few years now, anything that happens while the combine's going on, if you're not able to get to a TV and you just want to follow it along, maybe sneakily while you're at work, then you can do that. Or if you just want to come back at the end of the day when you finish work and just run through everything that you maybe missed and what happened there, then it'll be on the live blog. We'll do a review post at the end of each day as well, just summing up everything that happened and the kind of what we've learned. For example, on Friday, we'll go through the trench explosion formula data and just see how explosive this offensive line class is. We'll do the same with the defensive lineman as well. And we'll run through all the way through until Monday. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay with Seahawks Draft Blog during the combine. It's going to be a very fascinating off-season and combine for the Seahawks. So stay tuned.